Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Got Mental Health Podcast. I am your co-host, Rachel Cove. I am a multi-passionate entrepreneur, author, artist, mother, and certified recovery coach.
I'm your co-host, Arthur Mogilevsky, entrepreneur, girl dad, animal activist, and owner of AM Healthcare, a premier substance abuse and mental health treatment program.
With the collective experience of 21 years working in the mental health field, we are excited to bring to you a safe and fun place to talk all things mental health.
We will be interviewing experts, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals in the entertainment industry to better educate, inform, and inspire our community to have positive mental wealth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Got Mental Health Podcast. I am your co-host, Rachel Cove, along with my fabulous co-host, Arthur Mogilevsky.
Mogilevsky, Rachel, let's get it down.
Doesn't matter, Arthur. It doesn't matter. I'm just kidding. You have a great last name.
Stop diminishing my birthright.
Okay, anyway, back to David Wiss here, who's, I think you were one of our very first guests on this show, which feels like a lifetime ago. Also feels like yesterday. But I'll probably have you on this show probably like 10 times. So you're one of my favorites to interview. To give people a little background on who you are, David became a registered dietitian nutritionist in 2013 and founded Nutrition in Recovery, a group practice of RDNs specializing in treating eating and substance use disorders. He earned his PhD in public health with a minor in health psychology from UCLA by investigating links between adverse childhood experiences and mental health outcomes among socially disadvantaged men. Dr. Wiss can be your nutrition and health consultant, functional medicine practitioner, recovery coach, or provide psychoeducation related to his expertise. Learn more about the intersection of nutrition and mental health using his new app called Wise Mind Nutrition, and follow him on Instagram at Wise Mind Nutrition. Welcome back, David.
Yes.
Dr. David.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. We had such a blast last time, and I look forward to building more of that energy with you both today.
Absolutely. So much pressure now.
I know.
I got to ask the right questions. No, we had a great time talking last time. And I think there was a lot of ways that we could have gone that we didn't go because we just ran out of time. So we were definitely excited about having you come back. So
Let's do it.
Well, I'm gonna get dirty, and not in the way that you guys might be thinking about. I'm sorry, but I want to talk about processed food, and I want to talk about the history. I want to talk about our addiction to it. I want to talk about why we even have it available if we know how horrible it is for us. So let's start there.
Charged topic.
A lot to we have to get like this noise buzzer.
Topic.
Anything that's like a hot buzzword or topic, just press it and it starts like blowing up. Like,
That's good.
Like Jim Cramer on that stock show or whatever. Anyways, go ahead.
There's a lot of arguments that can be made on both sides, right? For example, we know that there are hunger problems across the globe, and that our ability to process food and to ship it to other countries has been helpful in aiding global nutrition problems, right? So it would be unwise to say that processed food is historically only a problem, because it has been shown to be helpful.
That's a very fascinating way of looking at it, and you're absolutely right. Let's take it a step back, because like here we've had processed food for so long. How long? When did processed food become a thing?
So it really depends on how you define processed food, which we can get into.
Right.
But like technically, drying an apricot out in the sun for a dried apricot would be considered processed food, right? So people that are, very food positive, that argue against people being anti-processed food, say there's processing of food everywhere, right?
Right.
And so there's this newer terminology that comes from the NOVA classification, which is very recent, by the way, which looks at food processing in 4 different categories, right? And I'm probably gonna butcher some of it in terms of the actual language, but there are 4 categories of processing that go from unprocessed to minimally processed to processed to ultra processed, right? And so it is wise to discern between processed food and ultra-processed food. And that's a distinction that has emerged more recently because making processed food the culprit, I think, is difficult for people to get behind.
Sure.
But when we say ultra-processed food, we're talking about culinary ingredients that have been processed. So we're talking about refined sugars, refined oils, refined grains, constituents of food that don't directly resemble food, that have all been brought together to formulate, in some industrial fashion, to formulate some food-like substance that is packaged and generally driven by interest in maximal profit, right? So these are multinational billion-dollar food corporations that are, controlled by investors on Wall Street, right? So ultra-processed food, we're talking about things like snack cakes, cookies that are packaged in school lunches, right? Sodas, things of that nature that are very far from resembling food. But when you just use the term loosely processed food, you could be talking about, vegetables that were boiled or steamed, right?
So maybe for the sake of this interview, when I refer to processed food, I used to just call it processed food, but maybe for the sake of this interview, I'm going to call it ultra-processed food.
Let's do that.
Let's do that so that there's no confusion. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I think it's important to define for people that are out there, because again, processed food, it's a buzzword, right?
Yeah.
It's like trauma. It's a buzzword right now, right? Or at least it has been. So I think it's really important before you go there to define what that really is, because it already has a negative connotation. Like when I tell people that I'm vegan, automatically, oh, you eat processed stuff. Whoa, now I'm like shamed for, because I'm vegan and I have to eat processed things. So I think it's important for people to define what is ultra processed or processed. Is there regulation, or is there a community that's trying to drive like a moniker or like a sticker for food products to show that this is ultra compared to regular? Like let's define it first and then hop into that.
Once it was determined that we could classify it based on this terminology, the NOVA classification for food processing, researchers were then able to do deep dives into how common are these foods in the food supply in different countries. And there was one study from a few years ago that showed adolescents eat over 60% of their calories come from ultra-processed foods.
Wow.
In the United States, right? In the UK, it was somewhere similar, but then in some other countries, you get lower numbers. In South America, maybe 30%. And now we have a conversation. We're saying that more than half of the calories in our growing brains are coming from ultra-processed foods, which generally are concentrated food-like constituents rather than actual foods that have nutrition inherent to them. Now, there are also laws that require certain foods with some level of processing to add nutrition back into it. If you've ever looked at breads, you see enriched white flour, right? That means that in the processing of the grain, a lot of the nutrients, the B vitamins, are lost because the processing actually destroys very sensitive nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. So there are rules that say if you refine, for example, wheat, and you want to sell it, you have to add back in some of the B vitamins that were lost in processing.
Interesting.
So a consumer, like a parent looking to buy food for their children, will look at a cereal or a bread, and the package will say, this is an excellent source of 13 vitamins and minerals.
Right.
And they will assume that those vitamins and minerals were inherent to the food because naturally wheat or some of the grains that are made to create cereals do have nutrition in them.
Sure.
But in the ultra processing, a lot of those nutrients are lost. They're added back in, and the consumer isn't aware of the difference between the nutrition that was in the food versus the supplemental nutrition that was added in after processing.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is like orange juice. How much actual vitamins from the oranges themselves are you receiving? Because a lot of the vitamins are in the actual peel rather than the orange itself, right? And that's why, like, I mean, in Russian culture, I have family members that are eating the actual peel rather than the orange itself because of the vitamins. And so the process of developing the orange juice, you lose most of that, right?
Yes, well, it's a great question because there's so much more to food than vitamins. We think about vitamins, right?
Right.
Vitamins A, the B vitamin, C, E, K. There's these known essential vitamins and minerals, but there's a whole world of nutrients that are called phytonutrients, which are not vitamins or minerals, but are potent nutrition. Generally, these are antioxidant compounds in the polyphenol family. If you think about the reasons why blackberries or blueberries are so potent in terms of their nutrition, it's not necessarily because of the vitamins. It's because of the antioxidants, like the anthocyanins, a bunch of really lengthy words that no one can pronounce, right? These are the compounds that are naturally in plant foods that are the most sensitive, that are the most easily lost in processing. So the orange juice might actually still have some of the vitamin C, but we have to remember that there's more to the orange than just the vitamin C. There's probably 100 other polyphenolic plant compounds that are adding value to the nutrition above and beyond the vitamin C. We've done this really, I'll call it a terrible job of reducing food to vitamins and minerals. It's a reductionistic approach to looking at nutrition. We've determined that if we can look at food and see calories, macronutrients, micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals, then we can sort of duplicate those in the laboratory, add them back in, give people a multivitamin, and they'll be getting the nutrition that they need. But the truth is there's so much more nutrition than we are generally recognizing and measuring and putting on nutrition facts labels.
When, do you remember, and again, if you don't know the exact date, it's totally fine, but when was ultra processed food created? Do you when did that start? Because I read somewhere that before the 1940s, there wasn't as much disease that we have today. And I'm wondering if there's a correlation between the creation of processed food and disease.
Well, certainly there is. It's also important to add that our lifespan has increased, right? So if you increase the human lifespan, you're going to have more disease, right? Because people are living longer. So you have a lot of people that have, diseases in their 70s and 80s. So we have to be mindful that, yes, we have a lot more disease, but we also have a longer lifespan. So that's a trade-off. People live longer, but have lower quality of life, right? And there's a lot of people that would say, I don't want to live till I'm 89 with the last 10 years in a disease state. I'll go when I'm 72. Yeah. And that argument certainly has its validity to it. But if you map out the timeline of the way the food service, kind of the industrial complex has evolved over time, it's really like the TV dinners in the 1950s that really made the first big change, sociologically. And they had a really smart campaign, which was telling people, you guys, your life is hard enough. You've done enough work. Let us do the work for you. You can finally relax. There's no reason that you should spend, this is to the mom or the head of the household. There's no reason you should spend 2 or 3 hours cooking meals when we've done the work for you. Your life is hard. Let us provide for you the dinner already made. All you have to do is pop it in the microwave. And that was a big revolution in the way that people consumed food. I mean, they were called TV dinners because it was also the entertainment industry working in cahoots with that effort to try to get people in front of the television to watch more TV, right? So it was like, this was the microwave, the food, and the TV world, like all coming together. Just microwave the dinner, sit in front of the TV and eat the TV. Eat the food. It'll be easy, and you'll enjoy it, and life will be so much more convenient. And that's where, the big angle has always been from producers of ultra processed food, is that this is way more convenient.
Right. And
that's why they call them convenience stores, right? This is about making things easy for people so you don't have to put in effort. No one's like making their own potato chips these days. Unless you go
Unless you have an air fryer, which I just got.
Okay, I was going to say there are exceptions. There are people on TikTok making some incredible potato chips. Yeah, it's a thing.
You want to hear a fun fact?
Please.
No.
Okay.
Just kidding.
That's interesting. I love that, though. McDonald's, April 15th, 1955. Burger King, 1954. Chick-fil-A, 1946. Wendy's, 1969. So it's all within the 50s and the 60s.
That's right.
That a lot of the fast food conglomerates started coming out.
Wow.
And it generally, it wasn't until I think 1980 that historians really mark the beginning of the quote unquote obesity epidemic, when the actual trends started to change, in the United States, and then started to export food and those weight trends globally, right? So I think that 50s TV dinner, and then fast food, and then 1980 is when like the industrial food revolution really took off, and you had factories in places, and they were basically shipping out food to other countries, right?
Yeah. And speaking psychologically around it, I do find, and which is interesting because I think the baby boomer generation would be the 50s, correct? Would be 50s to 60s or 70s, right? It's like right after World War II. I find psychologically that generation to be the most loyal to processed food. They want their hot dogs. They want chips that are cooked in just the most disgusting, clearly I'm passionate about this, but just the most disgusting chemicals. And for some reason, I've challenged people in my life about that. And they are very resistant to believing that these foods could be bad for you. And I'm curious, what do you think about that?
I'm sure that the hot dog in 1972 is different than the hot dog in 2023.
Is it even what is it?
It's everything mashed up into one.
It's disgusting.
It does represent profit maximization. They're going to say, we're not going to throw away things that could be resold, right? So there are other parts of the animal.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand where those people came from a cultural standpoint as well. Like, my family grew up in a country where all you can eat is potatoes and bread. That's it. So now you introduce all of these easier methods that, I mean, let's be honest, they taste good, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it tastes good.
It tastes good. It's easy. Like, I grew up in a household, my father ate cold cuts. He would just grab cold cuts and just eat them like a snack.
What is that again?
It's whatever's left in the body of the animal is mashed up into a circular, we called it kolbasa in Russian, but it's a cold cut. It's
processed meat.
Processed meat. And so, really processed, right? And you really don't know what's inside of there. But it was easy. It was simple, and it was more than what they had. And that goes back to even people that lived here. I mean, through the Great Depression and then World War II, it's like they didn't have an abundance of foods and varieties. And you had, immigrants that came here and eventually opened up restaurants with their own cultural aspects, right? They didn't have any of that. They just had whatever's available in the convenience store. And so it was fast. It was easy. It was simple. They didn't have to think about it. It was also during a time of boom after the war. People were worried about making money, and they had more abundance of money and resources, so they can afford things faster. So you kind of get where they're coming from. Whereas now, and I'm sure David would agree, we live in a culture where people are questioning what they have in their food. They're being more receptive of being conscious. Like, you have a huge uptick in, I'm not saying that this is the solution, but vegans or vegetarians or pescatarians or whatever it is. And that's because we're being more consciously aware of what we're trying to put in our bodies. Right? I mean,
And, it really does come down to, effort and the societal changes that are happening. Like, we are in a world where more and more things are being automated for us.
Right.
And it really is difficult to go back from that. That's right. True. And I think we might have talked about that on our last thing. Not only do we have fast food, but now you don't even have to go out and go to the drive-thru and get it. It'll get delivered to you.
It's
right.
I was in Melrose, and I was next to Cafe Gratitude, and I'm getting in my car, and all of a sudden I see this little fucking robot buzzing down the street, delivering food to someone, and I was in shock. It was just so strange, and we're so addicted to convenience. Pretty soon, like, I don't even know what humans are going to be needed for, like, because everything's going to be done for us. Anyway, I know I kind of went off there, but one of the things I'm curious about is, how is it that so many of the things that are sold in grocery stores are even sold in grocery stores, when in other countries you can't sell certain foods because those chemicals are not allowed in those countries?
Yes.
How is that even? How do we know if things are actually killing us, causing us cancer, causing us obesity? How is this stuff even sold? How is hot Cheetos given to children? Skittles, M&Ms.
They're trying to make that illegal, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's illegal in Europe.
Yeah, to look at the European Union's sort of list of banned chemicals is a much sounder approach, because I think they are less susceptible to the influence of big corporations. I think big corporations have a lot of power in the United States, and these are the corporations that, as we know, like big oil, big pharma, big food, they're all like making sure to defend their positions of power, and they have very predictable playbooks. If you look at how the tobacco industry played public health efforts to really identify their products as being problematic, they were able to plant a lot of doubts about the science, attack the scientists, and their sort of main goal was to come back to this narrative of like, this doesn't cause cancer. There's other factors that could cause cancer. In fact, like, this is safe. It's the people that choose this. And it took them like decades and thousands of studies to be able to show unequivocally that tobacco products cause cancer, right? It literally took 7,000 studies in like 30 years, right? So when you think about our efforts to try to like, go after the food industry, I think it's safe to say that we're probably still 1 or 2 decades out, just in terms of like their lobby and their power and their ability to produce science that shows that people are just overly concerned and that this is diet culture. Everyone's freaking out for no reason, right? They have a lot of really good strategies, and it's effective.
Yeah. And I don't think you're just battling the food industry. You're also battling the pharma industry, and you're battling the health industry, because they're all in cahoots with one another.
That's right.
But that's a theory for another day. I have a question for you. It's not a hypothetical, but kind of is. So would you agree? Okay, so one of the things that's constant in our life is land, right? There's not more land coming, right? Whatever land there is what the land that we have.
Fair enough.
Until the robots come in.
Well, whatever. Let's just assume that, right? The one thing that isn't constant is population growth, or a downward trend. But either way, from a population standpoint, there's kids always being born. There's obviously there's death and this and that, but people are always being born, right? So the need to feed more people is always going to be there, right? And with a constant that land is never growing more of, right? We have to, or the corporations or societies or the governments, whatever, have to utilize that land more effectively to be able to feed the ever so growing population growth.
You nailed it.
So,
wow, that was good, Arthur.
Well, thank you.
He's been to a Monsanto-sponsored talk before.
I've watched a documentary or two.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, how do you work against that, right? Because in my mind, everything's going to be processed then eventually.
Correct. So when you listen to the argument in favor of We are in global crises. We need to feed the world. This is difficult. That the appeal to that emotion is powerful, which is that, there are people starving in other parts of the world, and we're trying to, make rice that has vitamin A in it to be able to export to these countries. Like, how are you privileged people? You're so angry about the Doritos, right? When there's people starving in other parts of the world. Like, what's wrong with you? And you're like, wow, I guess I am pretty privileged. I live in West LA and I'm really concerned about food processing when there's other problems in other parts of the world, right? So that's an argument in favor of food processing, which is that we need to process food in order to support the expanding population and to be able to have food to feed the world, right? But then when you look at it in the context of the United States, you look at, how a lot of these food processing decisions are driven mostly by profit. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, we're not talking about the same thing, are we? So for example, in the, I believe it was the 1990s, it was a lot of efforts to sort of change food formulations to quote unquote combat the obesity epidemic. And I don't know if most people know this, but once Kraft Foods was owned by Philip Morris, right? The producers of Marlboro Red, right? Yeah. Cigarettes, right? So, and they had, they do the same kind of neuroscience research. They hire the same scientists to figure out the bliss point of foods. What is the perfect amount of a substance to maximize the addictive potential of it? Anyways, there was some big public health efforts to try to change food to support less addiction-like eating and less quote-unquote obesity. And Kraft put out an effort to reduce salt, to reduce sugar, and to reduce added oils and fats to their food. And their sales dropped. The sales of their food dropped pretty quickly. People were switching to other brands, and they were frustrated. Yeah. And they added all of the sugar, salt, and the fat back into the foods because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to produce products that create profit. You understand?
Wait. When you're describing this, the main thing that's going through my mind is the little rat that went from the cigarette smoking lab to the testing of the chicken nugget lab.
That's right.
Figuring out which one. It's just mind blowing. But you're right, 100%.
That's what we're up against.
Which is scary.
Yeah.
How much? Okay, how do I phrase this? Okay, how dangerous is ultra processed food for the developing brain of a child?
Yeah.
What are the impacts later on in adulthood?
So this is where it gets good. And this is where I've really scratched my head and tried to figure out, is the negative impact of ultra processed food due to the direct effects of the added sugars, salts, fats, and the other ingredients that make food stable, right? If you think about the colors, right? The preservatives. Is it that, or is it all the nutrients that are lost in the food processing?
Wow.
That's
right?
Interesting.
So it's not clear how much of the direct effect is through pro-inflammatory things that were added to foods or all the inherent nutrition that was lost during processing. And if you think about the real effect of ultra-processed food, what it really does is it teaches a brain what to expect from food. So when a child grows up eating a lot of ultra-processed food, they generally have a lower preference for non-processed food because it doesn't stimulate the same amount of neurochemical reward. So in my opinion, the problem, yes, I do think that there are inflammatory consequences of some of the things that they're adding to foods. But in my opinion, the real problem is that it creates children and adolescents who no longer eat that other food because they don't enjoy it. And that's where we're running into real health consequences. All those phytonutrients that we talked about, all those polyphenols that are in the blue, purple, yellow, orange, actual the rainbow, not the Skittles rainbow, right. The actual rainbow of plant hues, all those foods are not coming into their body. They're not consuming those foods, so they don't have protection against the oxidative stress. So that's why I think it's safe to say if someone does eat a very balanced diet where they're getting lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, most people would say there's room for a little bit of ultra-processed foods.
Right. If
you're eating a lot of really good nutrient-dense foods that are protective, there's room for a little bit of this stuff, right? And I think, when you have children growing up eating 70% of their diet from that, and then they only eat green beans when their parents force them to, right? So that they get their allowance, right? That's a problem, right? So it has to do with the overall kind of ratio between them that I think is important. And ultra-processed food, it loses a lot of nutrients. And I think the biggest one is fiber. If you look at what food processing does, one of the biggest go-tos is the removal of fiber from the food, because fiber makes food, it has a more kind of difficult texture for the mouth. If you think about the difference between like an Ezekiel bread versus a Wonder Bread, the Wonder Bread melts in your mouth, right? It hits your blood sugar really quickly, and that registers by the brain as survival promoting and something that one should do more of. A very fibrous grain, that's going to hit your body very, very slowly. So even in the mouth, you can detect this is something that my body is going to have to work to get access to, right? And if you think about the orange versus the orange juice, right? The biggest difference is the fiber. And it turns out that all those fibers that are in food is the food or the fuel for the gut bacteria that we want to proliferate inside of our system, right? So all the soluble fibers that are in whole grains, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, that's the stuff that creates a balanced microbiota, and that in turn supports mental health, right? So yes, there's phytonutrients, there's vitamins, and there's minerals, but it really is the lack of fiber in the ultra-processed food diets that, in my opinion, have the biggest consequences downstream for both physical and now we know mental health.
And because fiber is what makes us poop, right?
It does so much more, but that's how we all know
Let's
fiber.
not label it something
But
so
but I mean, every time how do I say this? Okay, we're going to talk about poop.
Let's go.
Let's talk about poop. We all poop. We're
poop.
so afraid to talk about poop and armpit sweat, and it's so weird to me. But every time I've ever had an issue and I go to a doctor, their first thing is oh, well, are you eating enough fiber, right? What is your stool movements like, right? So there has to be a link between fiber and stool, correct?
100%.
Okay, so there's a link between that. And then regarding the gut, yeah, juicy. Let's go there, right? So I think I want people to understand there's a link and a connection between what we put in our body and our mental health, right? There's cause and there's effect. I want people to stop thinking that what you put in your body doesn't affect you, because I constantly see people eating really shitty food with this impervious mentality that nothing's going to happen to them. I see it constantly. Oh, it's just a Slurpee. Oh, it's just funnel cake. It's just cotton candy. Yeah, but how often? And it's a touchy subject for me. So related to gut health and mental health, okay, and inflammation. First, I want you to define what is inflammation.
So there's different kinds. We have acute inflammation, which would be a marked, noticeable response by the immune system. So if you got cut, right, you would see some sort of a swelling, a scab. That's your immune system working very quickly and deliberately to fix a acute problem. Chronic inflammation is something that one might not notice per se. So I think the best example would be if someone has some sort of compromise going on that starts at the gut level, right? For example, some intestinal permeability, what a lot of people call leaky gut. You can have a very subtle issue that continues to contribute to your immune system working in a low-grade fashion, right? So it's not like calling all of its forces to come fix a problem, but it's continually got some little ongoing thing that it's nagging with, right? And that low grade inflammation can become, systemic, travel throughout the periphery, I should say. And it basically can, cause the body to not appropriate resources properly to where it might be needed because it's always kind of working on something, right? So back to fiber, if someone has very low fiber, it is very possible, and this has been shown in animals and humans, that if your gut, there's bacteria that live in our gut, okay? If they're not getting the fiber that they need from food to proliferate, to survive, and to thrive, the bacteria can actually start eating at our mucosal layer and then start eating at our gut lining, right? Because they're looking for things to survive on. And if they thrive on fiber and they're not getting it, they're going to find other things to eat, per se.
For the people that are listening, what are easy, tasty things that people can consume to get the fiber that they need, right? Because I was going back to you have a daughter. She's several months old. Mine's 5 years old. It's very difficult to get your kids to eat all the vegetables and the fruits. I mean, they like their pastas and, and I'm sure there's ways and there's methods without having to create a reward system around it. But, life happens, right? It becomes that type of discussion. But what are things that people can consume that are healthy, rich with fiber, that taste good, that don't have to convince your children to consume them?
Yeah, if we think about, this is such a good question. If we think about why is it that a kid has such a strong preference for low fiber processed foods versus eating, a gigante bean, you know what I mean?
Right. Raw.
Yeah. Right. Because if you think about it, they're basically determining the value of the food based on their reward response from it. Obviously, there's taste that happens, but the energy availability registers by their brain as being survival promoting, right? So something that has fiber in it is going to hit their system very slowly. The glucose will be released into the blood very slowly and will hit the brain very slowly. And that will register as not a positive thing for rapid energy. And when a human is in a state of growth, their brain is going to assign more value to things that offer rapid energy, right? So it makes total sense why the 5-year-old would prefer the refined grain to the whole grain, would prefer the pasta to the barley, right? The pasta hits their system quickly and their brain says, yes, this is what we need to survive. The barley ends up in their mouth and they're not sure what to do with it. There's a bunch of confusion going on. They eat it. They don't feel energetic right away. It's confusing, right? So little kids will always, unless they're very, properly trained, which is, I think, very difficult to do in the current food environment, choose the more rapidly absorbing, lower fiber foods, right? But once you move through that phase and you enter adulthood, and now your prefrontal cortex is, hopefully fully online and available to start weighing the pros and cons of different decisions, one might decide that what I'm going to do nutrition-wise is focus on lower glycemic carbohydrates, which are unrefined carbohydrates, and to
which would be what?
Eat more fiber, right? So I think a lot of people, when they think fiber, think fruits and vegetables, because you look at the broccoli, you're like, this is fibrous, right? The celery is fibrous. But from, my work clinically, I can tell you that fruits and vegetables will not get you the amount of grams of fiber that you need to actually thrive.
So what will?
It's really beans is the highest.
No way.
And number 2 is whole grains. Right.
Burritos. Just eat burritos.
Chipotle.
I mean, yeah. But beans have a lot of fiber.
Yeah. But they make people fart a lot, so they don't want to eat them.
Because they're not fiber friendly. Their guts are weak.
Well, so hold on. 1 second. I want to go back 1 quick second. Okay. So what you're saying is that it's not too late. That if parents are in a position right now with their kids, it's I remember my nephew just ate French fries 3 times a day. That's all he ate.
Mine too.
let's say that nephew turns 18 or whatever, or they're 20, what is it, 24, 25, when you're fully developed. It's not too late to consciously make a decision and have like a legitimate conversation and retraining your thought process around food. And
it's a tough sell.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's
it
not too late.
But it can be
absolutely be done.
It can be rebuilt. It can be re-strategized. It could get all the nutrients and fibers that it's been missing out on for the past 20 years.
But here's the problem. People only give attention to nutrition when they have weight problems.
When it's too
Right.
late.
Right. And it's like, they're like, I don't have a weight problem. Therefore, I don't have to think about nutrition. Therefore,
Right.
but they have anxiety, depression. They have all these mental health issues, and they've never connected the dots to be like, the 3 French fries a day that I eat has something to do with it. Most people believe that is only a contributor to one's fitness and BMI, and still do not think that it's relevant to their mental health.
So let's go back to the gut. Well, I'm sorry, you had a question.
I was going to go back to the gut.
Let's go back to the gut.
Let's
tie that back in.
Baby.
How does that correlate?
What is the gut?
Yeah.
What is the gut? How is it? What is the actual, like, how is it going?
Here, take it out, Rachel.
It's funny. It's funny. We throw that term around a lot, and I think most people still think we're talking about like my gut.
I just found out the intestines are the gut.
Yeah, that's the gut.
I just found that out.
It's not this. We're talking about the gastrointestinal tract.
Which is how long, by the way?
Right? I think if you were to roll it out, it'd be bigger than a football field.
So,
right?
So that holds all of the food that we've had our entire lives. The ones that
hopefully not.
Yeah.
the
I'm sorry. When was the last time you did poop?
No. I guess what I mean by that, because someone told me that the food that hasn't been properly digested, there could be food in there from years ago, correct?
There could be, but that's more of like a sales point for people that do colonics and stuff like that, which I'm not against, right?
I love colonics.
Right. I've had a few, and they're great. But this idea that like, you've got food that's lodged in you for years is probably not as common as people would like to think. Your gut's job is to move things through. Right. You can have little pockets and things that get hardened where a colonic would be super helpful.
It's like a piece of gum that you swallowed like 7 years ago or something.
A smart body would learn how to move that through. If you swallowed a penny,
I did.
Yeah, I'm sure. A balloon with heroin in it, right? Like
I did.
I'm like, your body would pass that through, right? So what we're talking about is mouth to anus, right? And the concentration of bacteria get more and more once you get closer to the anus, so in the colon, right? That's where a lot of that activity goes on, right? So most people think about like the stomach, but then we have various intestines, right? Well, the large intestine, the small intestine, and then there's different subsections of the GI tract, which are responsible for absorbing different nutrients.
Okay,
right?
wait, let's pause. I'm going to eat a banana. That banana is going to go where first? In the gut first?
The gut is the term that we use to talk broadly.
Intestines.
Yeah.
And then what happens from there? And how quickly does it get absorbed? And why do people need enzymes and probiotics?
Yeah, great questions. The transit time is anywhere from 12 to 72 hours, and it's going to differ from person to person. And you could do an experiment with corn or with beets or certain things to figure out. In my opinion, like faster transit times are better than very slow ones because it shows that your body's sort of moving, but faster isn't always better, right? And when I was a kid and I conceptualized like the gut, like you eat a banana, right? I literally used to picture just like, it moving through, and like I think about like a little heat, little pressure, and it just sort of like pushes on it and moves it around, and then like it pulls out nutrients and it turns it into brown and it squishes it together and it comes out, right? It turns out that a lot of our feces is bacteria, right? So we're actually, which is why it would make sense that it would smell the way it does. We eat food.
Bad bacteria.
Not necessarily.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, not necessarily. I think that's the real problem with our kind of conceptualization of gut health, is that most people think of bacteria as bad, right? But it turns out that a lot of them are good. We want them there to help break down the banana, right? To do like the transformation process. So you've heard the term probiotics, which is the bacteria that one might consume through pills or through food.
You like them?
We like them.
You
right?
do?
I do.
Okay, I'm going to say one thing.
Yeah.
I went to one of the biggest hospitals you could ever go to, and I was seeing one of the head of this gastroenterology. What's that called? Gastroenterology.
Gastroenterology.
At a specific major hospital.
And he said they're bogus.
I was blown away.
Yeah.
He was like, "Yeah, I don't believe in probiotics, and I don't give them to my clients." This is the head of a major hospital. How could the head of a major hospital not think that probiotics are good for you?
I mean, the evidence is always mixed, and it really depends on what type of outcome someone is interested in. So, people that study, cardiovascular disease are going to be looking at cardiovascular outcomes, right? People that study depression are going to be interested in depressive outcomes, right? So someone might think about the weight of the evidence with probiotics, and I'm just making up cardiovascular disease as a difference. They say, well, probiotics do not, after a systematic review and meta-analysis, do not show a statistically significant benefit on cardiovascular health, right? At that point, it might be unethical for a doctor to recommend that to the clients if it's not considered highly supported by the weight of the evidence, right? Whereas like if you looked at depression, it's the same thing. You're going to have mixed studies, out of the recent systematic review, it's like, 6 show that they were effective for depression, a handful didn't. You see what I mean? So like the question is like, okay, well, what type of probiotics did they use? What strains did they use? Who were the people that met inclusion criteria for the study, right? What did they measure as the outcome, et cetera? So it's a difficult thing to research with probiotics and with gut health because in order to like isolate the effects of something like a probiotic, you'd probably have to control for people's diets, which is really, really hard to do, particularly given how much ultra-processed foods people are eating, right? And there's also ways to get probiotics from foods, from fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut and yogurt, kefir, et cetera. So I think a lot of people are saying, let's skip the probiotic supplements and let's just eat the fermented foods. And that's a valid argument as well. The other reason that a doctor, a gastroenterologist might not be pro-probiotic is because the supplement industry is not regulated. And there's a lot of probiotics that are sitting on shelves of places like Albertsons that are useless.
Right.
They're garbage. They're dead.
What are they titled under instead of a dietary supplement or something like that? Like it's not really.
It's considered a dietary supplement, and like anyone could move into that sort of industry space pretty easily. So there's a lot of probiotics that have not kind of stood the scientific muster and passed the sniff test.
So what foods make your gut happy? What are foods that people can say, okay, right now, like I hope you're listening to this podcast and I look at food as medicine. I also look at it heals us and it's preventative. We can use food to prevent sickness and disease. What are some foods that make our gut really happy that support our mental health?
It's plant foods. I'm telling you, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's foods that are from the plant kingdom that have high fiber, right? So when you think about beans, I think about, you mentioned burritos, right? Obviously black beans, chickpeas, lentils, right? Those are like top 3 go-tos.
Wow.
Right? And then when you think about whole grains, I'm really trying to get people to move away from the wheat consumption because that's generally a refined grain and it has other problems with it, specifically problems with glyphosate, which is a pesticide that's used and can be very harmful to gut health as well. But we have whole grains. I like quinoa, farro, barley, right? These are foods that need cooking, which most people don't want to do. And like, it's a hard sell. I tell someone they're like, I will do anything to improve my nutrition. I'm like, all right, well, let's start eating beans and whole grains, right? And it's like anything except that. You know what I mean?
Can it be a combination, like you said earlier, right? Like if you're rich in fiber and you're intaking all of these fruits and vegetables, like, okay, have a processed thing, right? Have a processed food. like as a cheat kind of thing. Can you blend them together where now it's like, okay, you're going to cook your pasta, make your pasta with beans. Right?
100%.
Is that something that you promote? Because like you said, it's somebody's like, I want something quick, I want something easy, I want to like click, and it's already available, right? Put it in the microwave, heat it up, let's go, right? That's the reality. That's the reality we live in. I mean, most people, as much as they would want to change, might not change because the pace of our environment is getting faster and faster and faster, right? So can we incorporate?
We have to mix in convenience with reality.
Right.
Yeah. And we have to mix in ultra processed foods with whole foods at some point.
Right.
Isn't that the benefit of meal prepping? I think meal prepping is a great solution, don't you think? Because it eliminates having to do something every day, but you have to put more effort and time and energy in a 5-hour period in one day versus 1 hour every single day, which for me seems more exhausting.
I like the idea of batch cooking, where
that?
you just make a larger amount than you need,
right,
and kind of keep it in the fridge. I think that meal prepping can be very problematic for people if you like create the meals and stack them up, because you run into food fatigue pretty quickly. You're on day 3 of your 4-day prep and you're eating the same salad that you ate yesterday and it doesn't taste as good and you feel like you're eating bummer food. Those are the risk factors for people to binge eat, to say, like I can't eat like this another day, right? So if you cook food in advance, for example, if you made a big batch of quinoa, and some people make beans. You could make them in a slow cooker, pressure cooker, soak them, or you could just buy them already boxed, right, or canned. But if you have those things in the fridge, you can compile things really quickly,
right,
without it running into this sort of mundane, I'm doing the same thing day in and day out. And so that's just one cautionary tale for meal preppers. I am all for it. But don't prep 4 or 5 days out, because then the food's been sitting there in that plastic container. Hopefully you got some glass and it's gotten old and now you're eating food that you don't like and you just can't wait to break out of your meal prep and wait for your cheat day and go on the weekend and do the thing. And that's why I warn people, if you over prep, you're going to set yourself up for like bouncing back to the other extreme, which we want to avoid.
Well, and also the process, like, I mean, because I've been on those meal prep plans, because again, time convenience and stuff like that, and cost. The process of putting it into a microwave and like heating it up, I mean, the nutrients are dead at that point. There is absolutely nothing left in that meal prep that,
really?
that you're
really
warming
true?
out. Well, because radiation that's like hitting
so sad.
your food.
The calories and the macros are there, right? And some of the vitamins will be there. Some of the vitamins are pretty resilient, but you can be sure that a lot of those really sensitive phytochemicals that we were talking about are not.
But what if I cook my food, put it in a container, and then I bring it to work. There's no stove at work. What are you supposed to do? How is it supposed to heat it? Are we supposed to bring a stove? I'm going to bring a stove to the office. You know what I mean? Like it's just like it's tough.
You got to use a microwave here and there.
I have a question for you. Lab grown meat.
Ooh,
it's going to be huge. It's already big. Israel's in the forefront. You got a lot of, going back to our original question about limited land, huge need. What are your thoughts about lab-grown meat? That's like the ultimate process.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on all of the nutrition that would be inherent to it. I could probably speak to it more like philosophically.
Okay.
I definitely know that there are problems with animal agriculture that need to be solved, right? And so like it's not surprising to me that this might be one of them, right? In terms of nutrition, though, right? When coming back to our original point, it really depends on what you think about when you think about nutrition. Are we just thinking about protein? Or are we thinking about other nutrients that might actually be in animals, right? Like you think about like people are now eating, they call it like nose to tail, right? You eat the whole animal because there are certain nutrients that are in different organs, right? I don't know if you've seen on social media people that are eating brains and testicles and kidneys and eyeballs, right? Because there is some sort of understanding now that like a lot of the nutrients that are in plants are actually stored in different parts of an animal, which there's some truth to, right? If you think about it, like, a lot of those vitamins that we talked about that are in plants are actually stored by the animal who eats them in their liver. So if you eat the animal's liver, you can get vitamins that are not in other parts of the animal, right? So there's some value in eating more of an animal than we used to. But to come back to your question, like, I don't think that they'll be able to replicate some of that phenomenon in a lab-grown meat. I think they'll be able to create protein, right? And to create the texture that satisfies people's need for umami and for some of those other real appealing parts of eating animal products. But I don't think that you can duplicate nature to the point where, like, you'll be able to, in a laboratory, inherently create some of the nutrition that's in a liver or in an eyeball, per se. You know what I mean?
The robots will.
The robots will figure it out.
You can't outsmart nature. We can try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It always figures a way to check you. Make you feel humbled again.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you try to cut a corner,
I think really quickly, I don't know how we are on time, but I don't think we tied in mental health with gut feeling. And I think that's like our ultimate goal here. Can you give us a snapshot, a quick snapshot of what that looks like? We figured, okay, everything starts from the intestines, it goes through the gut. The gut is a vast system that there's a lot of processes. How does it eventually affect your mental health and well-being?
Yes. So I think this conversation got super popular about 8 or so years ago when it was sort of discovered that the majority of neurotransmitters, specifically serotonin and dopamine, had an intestinal source. So they were produced by gastrointestinal microbes, right? And then it became clear that just because something is in the gut doesn't mean that it crosses the blood-brain barrier, right? So it was like, okay, we know that the gut and the brain are linked, right? We know that there's neurotransmitters being produced in the gut, but does that mean that they're active in the brain, right? And so it's kind of like, no, they don't all cross the blood-brain barrier. So then we start to think about what are the pathways of communication between the gut and the brain. Of course, we have the circulation, right? We have our blood that's traveling, but we have the nervous system, right? So the vagus nerve connects the back of the brain to the various organs, and it has these sort of tentacles that are touching all throughout the gastrointestinal tract.
Wow.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yes. And it's bidirectional, right? So you have this nerve that's in there, like almost scanning, being able to detect data, like what's going on in here, sending it up to the brain. And so the gut and the brain are talking to each other through the vagus nerve and through circulation. And then more recently, we've really started to look at the role of the immune system in all of this as being an important mediator of all things in the body. But I've been most interested in gut-based inflammation, especially by way of ultra-processed foods and low-fiber diets, right? So you're eating a lot of pro-inflammatory foods and not eating a lot of plant-based colorful fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, right? So you've got a inflammatory cascade that starts in the gut and it travels to the liver. You've got the production of cytokines and all these other inflammatory molecules. We have more recent data to show that inflammation, we talked about low-grade systemic inflammation, can cross the blood-brain barrier. And there are parts of the brain that are scanning the blood, right? And they're like, what can we let in and what can we not? And this is the immune system, right? There has been a preponderance of, there's been some good data, particularly like in the realm of Alzheimer's and dementia, because that's where the research money has been going, right? To show that inflammatory cytokines can cross the blood-brain barrier and lead to neuroinflammation. And we know that inflammation, particularly if it travels to the amygdala, can lead to higher levels of anxiety, depression, craving, etc. So this is, I think, one of the links between the gut and the brain is that if people have a poor diet, obviously you're not getting nutrition that the brain needs that are cofactors for pathways in the brain. You're not getting vitamins and minerals. That's number one. Two is this gut-brain axis, right? The pro-inflammatory state crosses the blood-brain barrier, and now we have unstable brains that are working to resolve themselves and have higher levels of impulsivity, higher levels of basically more high-risk behaviors, drug seeking, sexual risk taking, cigarette smoking, poor diet, and thus the cycle continues, right? So there are ways, in theory, to disrupt mental health crises through gut-based nutrition. But these aren't the kind of things that happen in a week or in,
Are there tests that are actively being done or have been done to disrupt that process? Like, let's say they did a study of a pool of 1,000 individuals who have an addiction or disorder to something, right? And then they really test their disruption of the gut and what they put into their bodies and see the outcomes of that.
Yeah.
Has there been anything?
The answer is not the one that I've conceptualized. The study that you're mentioning with 1,000 people has not been done. There are definitely animal studies, and there are special populations that have been studied. So, for example, people that enter into alcohol detox, right? They've done some really good work in Belgium and in parts of Europe where if people are coming in with alcohol and early life adversity, what can we do at the gut level that will improve their outcomes, right? And then you think about, like, what are the outcomes? Are we measuring anxiety, depression, abstinence from alcohol, et cetera?
Right.
So the actual act of measuring neuroinflammation is very difficult and very expensive. We're talking about neuroimaging, $2,000 a scan, that sort of thing.
Wow. Okay.
So, like, this is something that will happen, and I just can't wait to see, what's next in the field of neuroinflammation, especially as it relates to addiction, alcohol, et cetera.
Dementia.
They're doing stuff there. There's money there.
Right, especially if the cost from $2,000 goes to $100,
right?
Then it's a lot more affordable to do it.
But the point is like, you can't do this kind of research unless you get funded. Yeah, no one's doing it like out of their own little hobby.
Of course,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to go get some beans.
Beans,
some
lentil
Chipotle.
soup. I had lentil soup last night.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
So lentils every day would be great.
I tell people, if you can get
Trader Joe's lentil soup.
Yeah, but that has wheat in it, and I don't do wheat.
if you can eat 1 cup of beans every day, the world would be a better place.
Black beans are good?
Black beans are good.
Okay, this is exciting. A good solution, and it helps your gut.
It helps your gut. And if you have problems with beans at first, it doesn't mean you should abandon beans. It means that we can do some work.
It means you have to work with them, like a relationship.
A relationship. Start with some probiotics, maybe some digestive enzymes. I use those much more carefully. And build up your gastrointestinal capacity, become more fiber friendly. And oftentimes in my practice, people come in and they can't handle beans. And I'm like, oh, that means your stomach needs work. And after working together for a few months, they're crushing beans with no problem. And that's the sort of evidence that we, in many ways, healed their gut.
Take it from somebody who's been eating beans for the past 7 years consistently. I don't have an issue with
pooping.
With that anymore. Everything stays out or in as it's supposed to. So
From mouth to anus.
There it is.
That's what he said.
Okay.
All right. Well, I am always bummed because I want to talk to you for like 3 or 4 hours. I have so many more questions.
Yeah.
But I just adore you. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us today. So I know we'll have you back in the future to talk about your app.
Mm-hmm.
You're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook. And can you just say your handle again?
Yeah, the Wise Mind Nutrition is the Instagram and the YouTube. And then I have Dr. David Wiss on Instagram as well. There's a TikTok for Wise Mind Nutrition and Dr. David Wiss, and Facebook, Wise Mind Nutrition. That's the sort of new blog. I have a website, Wise Mind Nutrition. I think I have 68 blogs now.
Nice.
And there's some really good information there, including like free resources, recipes, that sort of thing. Highly recommend checking that out.
That's awesome.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. And thank you to everyone who is listening. Thank you for all of your support on our Instagram, on our Facebook, on our TikTok. We love all of it. We love all of your participation and appreciate it very much. We will see you next week, and take care of your gut health.
Eat those beans.
Eat those beans.